All right, so the next section all deals with adding and subtracting. So you will need to think about that when you add or subtract, you need common denominators. Also, on any of the subtraction problems, I would suggest you add the opposite. So I'm not going to be doing all of these with you, but I do want to walk through the adding the opposite on all of the problems. So on number 12, when you do add the opposite, it's the subtraction sign between the fractions, not in the fractions. And when you add the opposite to the numerator, and make sure you add the opposite to every term in the numerator. So here I'm going to add, and I'll take the opposite of this and this. On 14, when I add the opposite, and when I go to 16, I'll add the opposite, and when I go to 17, I will add the opposite, okay? All right, so from there, what I want is the least common denominator. So I will need to factor my denominators, if at all possible, so that I can get the least common denominator. So for instance, let's just take a look at 12, and we'll take a look at 13. So on 12 in the denominator, again, what I would always try to do is a GCF, and I can't do that. There are 3 terms, so I will be doing easy factoring, and I'll just put this up here. So again, I just need factors of negative 16 that get me to negative 6, and those factors are going to be 8 and 2, with the 8 being negative. And this is easy factoring, so when I rewrite this, I can go straight into my factors of x minus 8 and x plus 2. And now I want to compare one denominator to the other denominator, because in my other fraction, x plus 2 cannot be factored anymore. So what I notice is that the first fraction has x minus 8 and x plus 2, and the other fraction just has x plus 2. So I will need to put x minus 8 with it. And whatever I put in the denominator, I put in the top. And there are times where we let the denominator carry through, and there are times when we let it go. So this is a time where we are going to let it carry through. So down at the bottom, I'm going to put my answer. The denominator in either fraction is x minus 8 and x plus 2, so that is the denominator in my answer. And then the rest of the work will be happening in the numerator. So in the numerator, in my first fraction, nothing happened there. It's x squared minus 3. And in my second fraction, I have, in parentheses, negative x plus negative 5 with x minus 8. And so I will need to do some multiplying. And what I mean by multiplying, if you remember over here, I would have the neighbors meet the neighbors. So first, the x squared minus 3 is just going to go along. And then in the highlighted part, negative x is going to go meet those two neighbors. So I get a negative x squared plus 8x. And then this negative 5 is going to go meet the neighbors. So I have negative 5x plus 40. And now I just want to combine my like terms. And the first thing I notice is that with these x squareds, these will cancel out. As far as the x terms go, when I add those up, I get 3x. And when I add the non-x terms, just these constant numbers, I get 37. So there's problem 2 done. All right, problem 3. So again, what I want is the least common denominator. So I look at each denominator, and I cannot factor this, I can't factor this, but I can factor this denominator. It is easy factoring. So at the top, I need factors of 15 that get me to negative 8. So those factors are going to be 3 and 5, with both of those being negative. And so I can replace this version with its factored version. It's easy factoring, so I can go straight to my parentheses. And now I'm just going to kind of check out to see what all the other fractions have. So on this one, in my first fraction, what I notice is I have x minus 3. The second fraction, I have an x. And in the third fraction, I have an x minus 3 and an x minus 5. So as far as 13 goes, I will want to make sure it has an x minus 5. And it has an x. And then in my second fraction, I'll want to put x minus 3 with x minus 5. And then in my third fraction, I'll want to make sure I have an x. And again, whatever I do to the bottom, I'll do to the top. So I'm going to write that in now. And this will need an x. There we go. All right, so let's start with the first part. All right, so as far as my denominator goes, I already know that there's going to be an x minus 3, and an x minus 5 all the way carried through, just like in 12, and that the rest of the work is going to come from the numerators. So starting in my first fraction, I got an x with an x minus 5 and an x minus 2. There's going to be a lot of multiplying here, just a heads up. And then I'm going to have a 3 with an x minus 3 and x minus 5. So what I want to draw your attention to as a little time saver is that these two, when multiplied, gives you this. Okay, because remember, these were the factors that got me to the x squared minus 8x plus 15. So these, again, multiplied, x minus 3 and x minus 5, will give me x squared minus 8x plus 15. So I'm going to go ahead and just remember that, and with 3, have that part there already. So x squared minus 8x plus 15. And then in my third fraction, I have 6x squared. So starting out, I'm going to have this neighbor go meet everyone. So right now I have x squared minus 5x. This is a lot of multiplying. And then that neighbor is going to have to meet the x minus 2. So I'll do that in a moment. I'll come over here and go ahead and have 3 visit everyone. So I get 3x squared minus 24x plus 45. And then we already had the 6x squared. So now what I want to do is just have these neighbors meet. So x squared is going to go meet, and I get x cubed. X squared meets that. I get minus 2x squared. Then these meet. I get minus 5x squared. And these meet, and I get a plus 10x. And again, just bringing everything else down, the 3x squared, the 24x, the 45, and the 6x squared. Got to squish that in there. And so now I'm just going to go through and combine my like terms. So first, when I look at the x cubed, nothing to combine with that, so that's what we'll start it off. Now I'm going to go and get all my x squared. So I got negative 2x squared minus 5x squared, so that's negative 7x squared. Put the 3x squared with that, so negative 7 and 3 is negative 4x squared. Put the 6x squared, which is just squished in with that, and I have 2x squared. So with your calculator, it's just negative 2 minus 5 plus 3 plus 6. And then I'll get my x's together. So as far as the x's, and again, this was a lot of multiplying here, or I'll get 10x and negative 24x, so that should give me negative 14x, correct? Yep. Or I'll just put minus 14x. And then the last thing, the one thing that doesn't have anything to combine with, is the 45. And there you go. That was a tough problem. So we got one of the tougher ones on this whole thing done. So that was good that we picked 13. As far as 14 and 15, remember, you're going to want to find common denominators. So make sure you factor this, and just looking at the others. 17, maybe that will give you a trouble as far as finding the least common denominator. So let's walk through that. When I just look at the numbers, I have 1, a 5, and a 10. So if these were just the denominators, 1, 5, and 10, then my least common denominator would be 10. So the first fraction needs a 10, the second fraction needs a 2, and the third fraction's good to go. And then when I start comparing the denominators, I have an x squared, and an x cubed. So remember, I have to build them all up to x cubed. So the first one only has an x, so I'll put an x squared, and now that's 10x cubed. The second one is an x squared, so it needs an x, and now that's 10x cubed. And then my third fraction is okay. And remember, whatever you do to the denominator, you do to the numerator. And as far as your final answer goes, your common denominator will carry through, and you will get 10x cubed. All right, let's go through one of the solving problems together, okay? So again, I do see adding and subtracting, but this actually equals something. So what I want to do is, after I find the least common denominator, which is what I need for adding and subtracting fractions, I want to let the denominator go here. So let's take a look at 20. So again, my goal will be to factor all the denominators. So this one, I will factor into x and x minus 2. The other two denominators I cannot factor. The other thing I'm going to do is add the opposite, just to avoid some mistakes later. So when I start comparing the denominators, the first one looks like it has enough. The second one, I'm going to put an x with it, and whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top. And the third one, I'll put an x minus 2 with it. So now that I have that common denominator, I can let it go and the numerator becomes my focus. So the first one is 12, the second numerator is negative 3x, and the third numerator after the equal sign is 3 with x minus 2. I'm going to first distribute. And now these are the same type of x, so I just need to get the x's on one side. So I'm going to move this negative 3x to join the positive 3x. So I'm going to add 3x, add 3x. This side is now 12 equals 6x minus 6. So now I'm going to add 6. And then I have 18 equals 6x. And when I'm done, I get my answer of 3. So the directions do mention check for extraneous solutions. And an extraneous solution just means, does this answer, if I put it back into my denominators, give me 0? And in the last denominator here, it doesn't. It gives me 3. If I put 3 in here, I get 1. And if I put 3 in here, I'll get 3 from this part. I'll get 1 from this part. So that just gives me 3 as well. So that is not an extraneous solution. Things that I think might throw you off a little bit is on 21. Again, what I would do is add the opposite and put this over 1. So when you're looking at your least common denominator, I would give this one an x plus 2, and whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top. I would give this one x, whatever I do to the denominator, I do to the numerator, which means this one will need an x and an x plus 2. So I'll be taking negative 1 times x and times x plus 2. So now you can let the denominator go, and here's your numerator. I will be letting you finish this problem. Okay, we're going to distribute. So I get 4x plus 8 plus negative x squared plus negative 2x equals 4x. So what I'm noticing is I have more than one type of x, so I'm going to bring everything to one side so I can factor. And it is actually better if this, the leading term, is positive. So I'm going to add this to this side. I'm going to combine these two, and that's 2x. And when that 2x moves over to join this 4x here, I'll subtract it, so that's a 2x. And then I'm going to move this 8 over to the side by subtracting. So now your job is just to finish this with factoring, all right? And then in the next video, just so you know, we are skipping these problems. This will not be on the test. We're going to end the video with partial fraction decomposition. So that will be our third and final video.